Frank Gaffney is with me. Frank leads up the Center for Security Policy. You can go to securityfreedom.org, counterjihad.com, presentdangerchina.org. And guys, when we're doing the rundown, I want to get Frank Secure America. What's the website again, Frank? Where it has everything?
SecuringAmerica.tv.
SecuringAmerica.tv. Guys, put that in my rundown, please, from now on, if you guys don't mind, just because that's the one. SecuringAmerica.tv. Frank, got a few places we can go today, but any place you want to start?
I want to start by congratulating you on breaking the news. It sounds fantastic, and I hope we'll be able to talk with you about it on some other platforms as well. Congratulations.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah, it means a lot. And those of you just tuning in, number 3 on Amazon currently, which is a surprise, I have to admit. I would love to get to number 1 if we can make it happen. Go to alexmarlow.com. Maybe we can.
Absolutely.
How about the news, though, Frank?
Start?
Yeah.
If I may, Alex, I'd like to start with what I consider to be increasingly evident. Namely, we're confronting a wrecking operation on the part of the Biden-Harris administration. There was a remarkable interview last night with Naomi Wolf with Tucker Carlson, in which she really laid out, interestingly enough, a left perspective, albeit I guess what would be very much a moderate left perspective these days. Her real fear, very lucidly and persuasively articulated, I must say, that we have entered the early, well, not so early, step 10, she calls it, of a 10-step process of being transformed into a totalitarian state. And let me just give you a couple of examples of the things that are weighing on me, Alex, that I think should be just frantically terrifying to just about all of us, left and right. We're seeing legislation hurtling down the tracks that will end, as far as I can tell, free and fair elections by essentially codifying what happened to us the last time around and making it nationally mandated. We're seeing open borders, and you've been talking about this a lot, and the implications of that for a demographic transformation of our population and the voters of this country. We're seeing a bill called H.R. 127 that is designed to disarm Americans. We're seeing an Equality Act that I believe literally will endanger women by affording all kinds of manufactured rights to be women, to men. And not least, a COVID-19 stimulus package that I think probably will be the straw that breaks the camel's back on the reserve currency of the world being the U.S. dollar, because we are now simply irresponsibly printing money, and people, I think, are going to stop holding it, perhaps in favor of holding cryptocurrency that is being now introduced by China with, interestingly enough, the partnership of an organization most of us have never heard of called SWIFT, which essentially fundamentally facilitates the use of various currencies around the world. So these are just telltale signs, Alex, of something that I think is very ominous here at home and compounds the dangers that I believe we're facing internationally as the world takes the measure of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and concludes that they are weak, they are irresolute, and they are ultimately willing to go along with the destruction of this country, if not actually enable it.
Yeah, I think it's. I think I caught some of that interview too on Tucker, and a lot of people have been asking me about it, and a lot of people brought it up on the show proactively. Maybe we should get some clips of that and play some of it. What do you make of the fact that America is kind of has a police state mentality? I was struck by this clip from Chris Hayes at MSNBC that I was going to play later, but let's play it now. Paul, play 5A, please.
Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, owner of Shooter's Grill in Rifle, Colorado, where guns are welcome and seemingly encouraged on the premises, has built her political identity around guns. Boebert vowed to carry a Glock around D.C. and on Capitol Hill. She released a video to make sure that we all knew. Last Thursday, she zoomed into a virtual congressional hearing with just a mess of guns piled on the bookshelf behind her. AR-15 style rifles, a handgun, just laying across a bunch of books. Boebert, who is raising 4 young boys, later tweeted that the guns are not in storage, but are, quote, ready for use. Apparently, she just leaves them out because she fears she may need to fire multiple rounds of ammo into someone who comes into her den. You know, lots of people immediately noted that the use of guns in that way as props and the implicit threat that comes with them has a, long, not necessarily great history among various movements around the globe. Osama bin Laden, for one, liked to pose in front of a bookshelf with a gun prominently displayed. The Irish Republican Army would display guns in its propaganda posters and its murals. Cuban revolutionaries, they posed with guns all the time, too.
Okay, pause.
And no single side of the spectrum has a monopoly.
So we get it. He's sneering at guns. And you're like bin Laden and you're like the IRA if you display your guns. And in the meantime, you go around Washington, D.C., which is completely safe and calm at the moment, Frank, and you see armed people standing with guns around our Capitol, around the White House, and the perimeter is expanding. And we're supposed to act like that's no big deal because it's the government with the guns. But once the citizens have the guns, then all of a sudden you're like Osama bin Laden or something?
Look, there's all kinds of double standards going on here. There are people who are going to be allowed to have guns, and that's not just, of course, the state, but there will be those considered to be psychologically sound, according to profiles that the Attorney General under this Bill 127, H.R. 127, will be involved in not only mandating but facilitating. And there will be people, Alex, and I have the feeling they will largely fall along, curiously enough, partisan lines, who will be deemed psychologically unfit to have guns. And you can bet that Congressman Boebert will be one of them who will be profiled or regulated into a disarmed state, and she may well have people coming into her den, who knows, or sailing her elsewhere.
Yeah.
And the trouble is there's really no break on this, and as Naomi said to Tucker last night, she's made a study, actually written books about, this kind of totalitarian onslaught, and she said that the step that leads to a totalitarian state is fundamentally where you suspend the rule of law. And that's, I'm afraid, what's coming. It's not that there won't be laws, it's that they will be inequitably applied. And she warns that the danger really is that this takes on a kind of inevitability to it, and people don't become cognizant of what's afoot until it's too dangerous, too scary, too frightening to respond. And that's where I fear we might be, and I think she's right to be raising the alarm about it. And also, interestingly enough, Alex, calling out for bipartisan opposition to what's going on here. And I personally am an old Scoop Jackson Democrat back in the day. I personally believe there are probably millions of Democrats who feel, as she does, that it was a mistake to vote for Joe Biden, especially when they didn't know that he was wholly owned by the Chinese Communist Party, for heaven's sakes, because that story, going back to your book, that story was suppressed by the press, right? That's one of the things that I think she's absolutely right to be saying to Democrats. We don't have to go down this road. We should work with Republicans. We should work with independents. We should work with people who are legitimate, authentic patriots to protect our Constitution against what is the inexorable creeping, if not galloping, tendency towards totalitarianism.
So you get these people on MSNBC, and I know they're not to be taken totally literally, Frank, but this is part of what I get into in my book in great detail about what they're really up to. But we know that if you're listening to this show, you know that Chris Hayes is he's to be taken with a grain of salt. A lot of that is pro wrestling, but you get but you still that he sneers at someone who's a high profile person, that someone might come into her living room, which of course is a possibility. It happens every day in this country, a number of times a day, and that's sneered at. But the idea that we have too many armed guards around our capital is not sneered at because, I don't know, right-wing extremists on 4chan or something that are or may or may not be organizing or may not be joking around. Who knows? But then we ignore stuff that's so fundamental, like we have an open border, what's happening with China, it is the legitimate threats to our national security that are taking place. And this is what's so frustrating to me, is that we spend so much time on Lauren Boebert's gun collection and no time on our open border, no time on China. And that to me is the problem. That is, it has to stop or we're not going to have a country.
Well, you're so right. And again, that's the kind of fundamental transformation that I'm talking about. And let me just pivot to the international side of this, Alex. You can bet that everybody on the planet that matters is observing this and are quite likely taking lessons from it that are going to be very perilous for our people. Let me just give you as an example. We are watching a foreign policy being advanced by the Biden administration that is, well, he likes to say America's back. And we've talked about this before. America's back to the Obama policies. In fact, most of the people in his administration at senior levels are old Obama people. And one of the things that was a hallmark of the Obama-Biden foreign policy, and that is now a hallmark of the Biden-Harris foreign policy, is it's better to be America's enemy than its friend. And what we've learned over hard experience in the course of many years, going back before even the Obama years, is that's a formula for having a lot more enemies and a lot fewer reliable friends, especially. And when you do that, one of the things that I think not infrequently happens is you embolden enemies not just to be hostile to you, not just to think that they can intimidate you or even be rewarded for intimidating you, but that they may calculate that they can safely go to war if it suits their interests at our expense, perhaps with some of our friends and allies. Taiwan comes to mind. Israel comes to mind. But will it be contained in this kind of world? I'm not sure it will. And that means we may see yet another perhaps Democrat-induced war inflicted upon the American people, perhaps with incalculably horrific costs if it winds up escalating, as it might well do in this kind of hyper-armed state of affairs, particularly with communist China, the Russians, now the Iranians, the North Koreans, and so many others.
Frank, there's one story that's out there that is disturbing, but I admit it's a little beyond my total comprehension, so I want your help on this one. So South Korea has unlocked $7 billion in Iranian assets after consultations with the Biden administration. Now, this sounds good, but I don't think I fully get it. Could you help me understand?
Yeah, the most important thing you need to know is that this is one of our key allies in the Pacific, South Korea, that has been taken over by the radical left in much the way that our own country has been taken over by the radical left, Alex, interestingly enough, through democratic means, engineered, I think it's fair to say. In fact, there's some who believe, one of my colleagues, Grant Newsom, based in Japan, a former Marine colonel, has really gone to school on what the parliamentary elections in South Korea, I believe last spring, involved. And it was a dress rehearsal, Alex, for some of the electoral theft that took place in our own country. Indeed, the Chinese seem to have been involved in both, and I think learned lessons from the former to do the latter. So we now have a president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, who is a really anti-American radical leftist, has been for years, surrounded by many like him, and he's doing the bidding of a radical leftist Biden administration. Again, it seems like yesterday, but the idea is the same. Let's give money to the Iranians in the hopes that they will do deals with us, and that it will somehow make us feel better about the fact that they are going full throttle to have nuclear weapons, which they will use against Israel and perhaps against this country if they can. This is insanity. And you had a profile or a report the other day about the general who is the commander of Central Command, Kenneth McKenzie. And I have to say, my heart really went out to him because he's a guy in the front lines, and he is watching, I am sure, Iran now becoming more and more aggressive. And you know what he was reduced to saying, Alex? I mean, it's in your piece, so you do. He said, quote, I think they would want to be, this is the Iranians, I think they would want to be recognized as a responsible member of the family of nations, unquote. Now that's, I mean, there's no basis for thinking that the Iranian mullahs would want that at all, but that's basically what we're down to, is whistling past the graveyard with very dangerous folks, certainly in the Middle East, and they have aspirations to be a real threat to this country as well. I'm sorry to be the bearer of a lot of bad news here, but your audience gets the reality that we are in deep trouble with this administration, and they need to be heard from. They need to be standing up. They need to be most especially holding accountable both, obviously, the Republicans, but also those 46, 47, whatever the number is, vulnerable Democrats, accountable for the votes that they're likely to cast in party line fashion if they don't hear increasing and irresistible pressure from their constituents that this is unacceptable to be engaging in this kind of, well, legislatively facilitated totalitarian transformation of the United States.
It's so well stated, Frank. So what hope do we have? Because, again, this is the problem with the priorities being off, is that it distracts us from the real threats, as we note on this show together pretty much every week, at least when the Republicans aren't in power. So what can we do? What action can we take?
Well, look, the good news, and it really is good news, is the Democrats barely have majorities in either the House or Senate. A handful, literally a handful. What is it, 3 or 4 people in the House? 1 in the Senate, changing, not voting in lockstep with their party leadership, whether it's, again, to open up country to tens of millions of illegal aliens or to disarm us or to destroy our dollar or whatever. Just a handful of people who say, actually, this isn't a good idea. My constituents don't want me to do it. I won't be reelected if I go the other way. I'm not going to do it, whether it's for my own personal self-interest or for, the nation's. One way or the other, we need those 47 Democrats, or at least a small subset of them, to know they must stand with America. They must not engage in this kind of totalitarian takeover. They must be, or will at the very least, be held accountable for doing anything less than defending our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to which they swore a solemn oath just a couple of weeks ago. Every single one of them. This is what we can and we must do in this moment, Alex.
Very good. Frank Gaffney, securingamerica.tv for all of his stuff. Frank, I really appreciate it. Very good big picture stuff today. I look forward to speaking to you next week.
Very good. Thank you, Alex.